This guy's name is Mihara. He lives a peaceful life deep inside the forest. However, from the outside, Mihara's current house looks quite lonely. When he steps outside to admire the scenery around him, Mihara suddenly recites a spell. A mysterious water sphere immediately appears in his hand. Going back to a short time ago, even though Mihara was still very young, he died in a tragic accident. After that, Mihara appeared in a mysterious space. The surroundings were filled only with dense white mist. At that moment, he was standing in front of an angel. It turned out that Mihara was about to be reincarnated. Mihara temporarily called this being Fake Michael. Although Mihara knew he was about to be reincarnated, he had no idea how his new life would begin. At this moment, Fake Michael revealed the truth. In his new life, Mihara would have complete freedom to live as he wished. No one would be able to control Mihara. He could even live without following any rules at all. Soon after, Mihara was reincarnated in Phi. Phi is a world overflowing with magic. 1 out of every 5 people there can use magic. Water is the element that suits Mihara the most. Because Mihara desired a peaceful life, Fake Michael arranged a suitable place for his reincarnation. That place was inside the Rondo forest. Even the house and food were prepared in advance by Fake Michael. After that, Fake Michael gave Mihara a document. It contained information about all dangerous monsters. Although the language in the book was very strange, Mihara was surprisingly able to read and understand it easily. After a while, he began using his own magic. It turned out that Mihara only needed to imagine it. He did not even need to chant complicated spells. This made Mihara feel a bit disappointed, because he had always thought chanting spells sounded very cool. However, reality was different from what Mihara imagined. From that point on, Mihara began a new life there. He then continued to study his magic further. Unexpectedly, he discovered many interesting things. This helped Mihara regain his motivation, because magic made life much more convenient. When night fell, Mihara relaxed in a hot water bath. At the same time, he thought about his plans for tomorrow. The next morning, Mihara started a new day full of energy. However, his food supply was gradually decreasing. Fake Michael had only prepared supplies for the first 2 months. From then on, Mihara would have to handle everything himself. Mihara began training to survive on his own. He successfully created his first attack spell. It was the water ball. However, it had almost no offensive power. Mihara also had another technique. He released a water jet. Mihara tried to create a thin stream of water at extreme speed. However, the result disappointed him. It was likely because Mihara was still not used to it. Suddenly, he remembered Fake Michael's words. The foundation of magic comes from imagination. If Mihara wanted to master his techniques, he had to clearly imagine what he desired, then gradually move toward the defined goal. Indeed, that was the case. Thanks to Fake Michael's advice, Mihara achieved a small initial success. The following day, Mihara began creating ice from the air. Although his speed was not fast, Mihara still seemed able to pull it off. And this was also his next technique. It was the ice spear. However, it did not seem to fly as fast as water. Because of that, controlling Mihara's power became difficult. Even though there were no results, Mihara still continued training to get used to it first. When Mihara became completely exhausted, only then did he stop the training session. After many days passed, Mihara's techniques gradually improved. He could create an ice spear almost instantly. So, Mihara decided to take a risk. He began moving beyond the safe area where he was currently living. Unexpectedly, the scenery there was very peaceful. This made Mihara extremely delighted. However, he did not notice that great danger was lurking behind him. It turned out that a dangerous wild boar had appeared. It soon confronted Mihara head-on. Mihara was overwhelmed with fear. Even his legs refused to move. Fortunately, Mihara managed to dodge the boar's attack. However, it quickly launched another assault. At that moment, Mihara forced himself to think calmly. Because he was now in a completely different world, Mihara could use magic here. So, he began to act according to his thoughts. Mihara swiftly created an ice path. This caused the wild boar to slip and fall on the magic he created. Next, Mihara suddenly combined it with ice spear. The ice spears were extremely sharp. They easily brought down the wild boar. In the end, Mihara successfully survived the danger. Even he was surprised by his own power. When Mihara returned home, he began researching the dangerous beasts around the area. The more he studied, the more astonished he became, because the world felt vast beyond imagination. The next day, while Mihara was searching for food, he was suddenly attacked by a giant hawk. This time, Mihara faced it calmly due to his experience. He knew he could not escape by running. The hawk's weapons were its sharp talons. It also possessed incredible speed. So, Mihara was certain he could not run away. His only option was to fight. Unexpectedly, using only basic techniques, Mihara successfully drove the dangerous hawk away. Only then was Mihara able to breathe a sigh of relief. At this point, Mihara finally realized that a peaceful life was not easy at all. However, he gradually adapted to his current life. He even began to gain control over his magic. From then on, Mihara's life became a cycle. Every day, he trained diligently. The rest of his time was spent hunting monsters and storing food. In his next encounter, Mihara's opponent looked mysterious at first glance. It was a terrifying headless being called Dullahan. Mihara attacked without hesitation. However, Dullahan was far stronger than he expected. Although Mihara quickly formed an ice shield to defend himself, it was shattered by Dullahan. After that decisive blow, Mihara could only collapse to the ground. Mihara admitted that he was still not strong enough. He was unable to defeat Dullahan. However, to Dullahan, it seemed he only wanted to teach Mihara a lesson. Dullahan slowly turned his water sword into ice. Then he handed it to Mihara. Without any words spoken, Mihara understood. This was not just a weapon. It was also a message. The rest would depend on Mihara's dedication to training. During another exploration of the forest, Mihara encountered the hawk he had fought before. One of the hawk's eyes had been injured, so it likely returned today to seek revenge. Mihara immediately created an ice wall with 5 layers. He initially managed to block the hawk's dangerous attack. However, his defense did not last long. Mihara then created multiple ice spears to counterattack, but they were instantly wiped out by the hawk. At this moment, Mihara felt extremely irritated, because this time, the hawk was very difficult to deal with. It seemed that it had evolved rapidly. Even Mihara could not keep up with its movements. After a while, Mihara used his ice sword. This was the sword that Dullahan had given him. With a clean and decisive slash from Mihara, the hawk immediately fell into panic. Its movements became clumsy and disordered. Mihara seized this opportunity. He successfully delivered a fatal strike to the hawk, leaving it unable to resist any longer. Mihara then pulled out his sword and returned home. On the way back, he suddenly saw a gigantic dragon named Lewin. Not only that, the dragon could also speak. This shocked Mihara greatly. Lewin then asked about an assassin hawk. This immediately startled Mihara, because he thought it might be Lewin's subordinate. However, the truth was not like that. After learning that Mihara had defeated the hawk, Lewin praised him, because that assassin hawk was no ordinary monster. It was not easy to deal with at all. Lewin then noticed the sword beside Mihara. Unexpectedly, he knew the true owner of that sword. Lewin was genuinely surprised. He could tell that Mihara was no ordinary person. The next morning, Mihara walked along the coast to search for food. However, he discovered a shattered boat. Beside it lay an unfamiliar man, completely motionless. On the other side, there was another person, but that person was writhing in pain. Therefore, Mihara brought him home for treatment. Fortunately, the young man survived, and that person was Abel. Abel was extremely grateful that Mihara had saved his life. Sadly, aside from Abel, everyone else had already died. Surprisingly, Abel had already expected this outcome. At that moment, Abel's stomach suddenly growled. So, the two returned home to eat breakfast together. Abel was curious why Mihara was dressed in such ragged clothes. But he immediately regretted asking, because his words might have been too insensitive, especially since Mihara had just saved his life. However, Mihara was not angry at all. Instead, he gently explained to Abel. In fact, no one lived on this island except Mihara. Therefore, there was no market here. All food had to be gathered by Mihara himself. At this point, Mihara did not hesitate to share about himself. He revealed that he could use magic. Abel was truly shocked, because more than half of the population could not use magic. However, Abel wanted to go to the sea to confirm something. So, he asked Mihara to guide him. On the way, Abel noticed that Mihara had no defensive equipment, even though this place was considered extremely dangerous. Therefore, Abel wanted to protect Mihara. Although Mihara seemed hesitant to refuse, Abel was very determined about this matter, because his survival until now was all thanks to Mihara. If he did not do this, Abel would feel deeply guilty. So, Mihara reluctantly accepted the proposal. However, when they arrived at the location, the body from yesterday was nowhere to be seen. Abel would likely have ended up the same way if Mihara had not helped him yesterday. Because of this, Abel once again felt deeply grateful to Mihara, returning to Abel's original purpose for coming here. Unfortunately, he could not find the item he was looking for. Even worse, Abel had no way to contact his companions. So, he was trying to find a way to reconnect with them. Perhaps the town of Loon was a suitable starting point, but Abel felt that he had drifted too far south. Mihara also knew nothing about Loon. However, he guessed that it must be far to the north. At this moment, Abel suddenly invited Mihara to travel together. The sudden proposal left Mihara completely surprised. Abel also knew that this would eventually happen. However, he wanted Mihara to see it as a job. It turned out that Abel had no idea where he currently was. He also had no clues about how to return home. Therefore, Abel needed to find someone he could fully trust to guide him. And the only person there was Mihara. Although Mihara was a bit hesitant at first, he eventually agreed to help Abel. However, Mihara needed to prepare a few important things. So, the two of them would begin their journey the next day. Abel became cheerful after hearing this. He immediately stepped forward and shook hands with Mihara. When night fell, Mihara wanted to go out for a while. He wanted to meet someone who only appeared at night. Abel was immediately confused by this, because he had previously heard Mihara say that no one lived on this island. However, Abel respected Mihara's privacy, so he did not ask further about it. As for Mihara, he was on his way to Dullahan's place. It turned out Mihara came to inform him that he would be leaving Rondo for a while. He was truly grateful for everything Dullahan had done, because thanks to him, Mihara was able to survive until now. Today would be their final duel. Therefore, Mihara intended to fight with all his strength this time. The two immediately charged at each other. At this moment, they both unleashed top-tier attacks. However, the result did not change at all. Mihara once again lost to Dullahan. But his emotions this time were very different. Because Mihara felt deeply satisfied, Dullahan then turned around and walked down to the lake. After that, he suddenly used magic to create a new set of clothes. This could be considered a farewell gift. Mihara sincerely thanked him. He was certain that he would treasure this outfit. The next morning, the two officially set off on their journey. Before leaving, Mihara carefully looked at the old house, because it was the place that had sheltered him after his reincarnation. As they were traveling together, they suddenly encountered a wild boar. Abel immediately rushed forward. He unleashed a powerful skill. Abel defeated the wild boar in an instant. This shocked Mihara with Abel's combat ability. After a while, they encountered another obstacle. It turned out to be a group of lizard men. This species was extremely dangerous, so both of them were very cautious. Abel was ready to take the initiative and attack again. However, Mihara noticed that they seemed to be surrounded from behind. He calmly used magic to deal with the situation. Mihara cast an ice spear to eliminate the 4 lizard monsters. This greatly surprised Abel. Even though Mihara did not possess any powerful weapons, he was still able to deal with the monsters swiftly. However, for Mihara, this was nothing unusual. After some time, the two discovered a gold coin. Although it was just an ordinary coin, it still surprised Mihara, because he had never seen one before. After walking for quite a distance, they noticed stones beginning to move. Fortunately, they reacted in time to defend themselves. It turned out they were surrounded within the territory of stone golems. Abel volunteered to handle the nearest one. He used his combat skill to pierce straight through the stone. However, its wound healed instantly, so it was time for Mihara to step in. He cast a 10-layer ice wall, causing the stone golems to disappear instantly. Abel, standing nearby, was once again astonished by the power of magic. They continued their journey, but ahead, they discovered a new monster. It was a gigantic hippopotamus. Unexpectedly, a group of dragons was also flying toward them. At that moment, the two could only watch them fight each other. With their current strength, they could not attack anything. When night fell, the two finally had a chance to talk. Abel mentioned magic resistance. It was a common type of trap found in dungeons. However, Abel had never seen a monster that possessed it. Unexpectedly, when hearing about dungeons, Mihara's eyes lit up, because he really wanted to explore places like that. At this moment, Abel shared more information. There was only one dungeon, and it was located in the central region of Lontown. That was exactly where the two of them were heading. However, Mihara suddenly became angry, because Abel had only mentioned this now. But in the end, Mihara could not really blame him, since Abel did not think Mihara would be interested in such things. After that, Mihara became curious about even more unknown matters. Therefore, Abel was willing to share everything he knew. The next morning, the two continued their journey. Mihara said that once they crossed the mountain range ahead, they would enter the territory of humans. This information had been shared by Lewin before. That was why Mihara still remembered it until now. After a while, both of them sensed something approaching. It turned out to be a flying monster. It had an enormous size, making Mihara and Abel feel fearful. Mihara quickly used food to lure it away. He successfully carried out this plan. The monster immediately flew elsewhere after obtaining the food. Thanks to that, the two managed to escape danger. Even though quite some time had passed, they were still shaken by the monster from earlier. If they had fought it, they probably would not have survived until now. Before long, they crossed the mountain peak. Their final destination then appeared before their eyes. Mihara saw a road stretching from west to east. The two prepared to head toward a nearby small town. This made Mihara extremely excited, because he strongly wished to sleep on a proper bed. After that, the two eagerly entered the town. When night fell, Mihara and Abel stopped at an inn. Abel took the opportunity to advise Mihara to register as an adventurer. Because if Mihara had a guild membership card, whenever he visited other cities, he could receive free entry at the gates. He could even buy magic stones and other items at better prices. What surprised Mihara the most was that the local specialty here was curry from earth. Abel noticed Mihara muttering to himself non-stop. So, he urged Mihara to hurry up and eat. Unexpectedly, the flavor made Mihara keep eating without stopping. This made Abel very happy, because he could see that Mihara really enjoyed the dish. It turned out that Lontown also had this curry. Perhaps it was a famous local dish. Even the next morning, Mihara was still thinking about it. After traveling together for a while, the two finally arrived at their destination. Lontown was surrounded by vast wheat fields, making the scenery incredibly beautiful. Even Mihara was captivated by its beauty. When the two reached the city gate, Abel was recognized by a guard stationed there. The guard greeted him immediately, because he had heard that Abel had gone missing. Abel explained that he was saved by a benefactor. That was how he was able to return here safely. And that benefactor was none other than the person traveling with him. Unexpectedly, the guard immediately thanked Mihara. Mihara saw that the two seemed quite close, which made him feel a sense of admiration. The next place they needed to visit was the Adventurers Guild. Because Abel was accompanying him, Mihara was able to register very easily. Even the matter of rank promotion was possible. Normally, newcomers start at rank F, but with a recommendation, a new registrant could be promoted to rank E or D, and that recommender was none other than Abel. He would be the one to recommend Mihara. After all, the higher the rank, the harder the missions one could accept, and the rewards would certainly be more generous. After a while, the two finally arrived. Abel seemed to be quite famous here. Because everyone recognized him, people immediately gathered around to ask about Abel. At this moment, Mihara could only stand aside and watch. To avoid causing trouble, he stepped outside to wait for Abel. Coincidentally, a beautiful girl named Sarah passed by Mihara. She was attracted by Mihara's impressive outfit. Even more surprising, Sarah knew the identity of Dullahan, the one who had given this outfit to Mihara. Sarah knew very well that Dullahan must greatly value the young man standing before her. Therefore, Sarah believed that Mihara was surely an interesting person. However, Sarah had urgent business and had to leave immediately. She did not forget to promise to meet Mihara again next time. Mihara stood there in a daze. Only when Abel appeared did he come back to his senses. After that, Abel pulled Mihara back inside. He then introduced Mihara to everyone there. Thanks to Mihara, Abel was able to survive and return safely. And Mihara was about to register as an adventurer. Therefore, Abel hoped everyone would help Mihara. At this moment, Mihara shyly introduced himself. Unexpectedly, the people around him were extremely friendly. They gathered around Mihara, which left him very surprised. After that, Abel introduced Mihara to the receptionist. He wanted to recommend Mihara to start at rank D. The woman sitting across from them was extremely shocked, because Abel had never recommended anyone before. However, she felt reassured since Abel was the one recommending him. Even so, Mihara still had to take a test. Its purpose was to evaluate his abilities. Regarding this matter, Abel wanted to speak directly with the guild master. So the receptionist led the two of them to his office. After hearing that Abel had returned alive, the guild master collapsed on the spot. He let out a deep sigh of relief upon seeing Abel again. Abel apologized for making the guild master worry. This time, Abel had come to introduce Mihara. He recommended Mihara for a rank promotion. For the guild master, as long as Mihara could prove his ability, he would certainly accept Abel's recommendation. While everyone was talking, other members of the Crimson Sword Party appeared. They were Rhea, Warren, and Lin. Upon seeing that their leader Abel was safe, everyone finally felt relieved. As for Mihara, he went with the guild master to handle the paperwork. Mihara was brought into his office. He also learned that the Crimson Sword Party was extremely famous. Naturally, their strength was overwhelmingly powerful. With Abel's recommendation, the guild master believed Mihara was also worthy. As a result, Mihara successfully advanced to rank D after that. The receptionist entered the room to complete the registration. Mihara then shared his personal information. He stated that he was a water element mage. Since Mihara had just arrived and had no place to stay, he was allowed to live in the dormitory for 300 days. The guild also offered a class that taught basic dungeon knowledge. It was held once every month, so Mihara could freely sign up to attend it. This made him extremely excited, because it was something Mihara had always wanted to experience. After a while, all the procedures were completed. Mihara had officially become a member of the Adventurers Guild. Naturally, he also received a guild membership card. After that, Mihara and Abel walked around the town together. Mihara was curious about many things. According to what Abel shared, in this Phi world, a day also had 24 hours, and each month had 30 days, just like on Earth. In addition to the curry Mihara had tried a few days earlier. With these similarities, Mihara believed that another reincarnated person had already been here, just like him at this very moment. This made Mihara feel even more intrigued. At this time, Abel announced that everyone would hold a party tonight to welcome his return. So Abel really wanted Mihara to join them. Of course, Mihara could not refuse. The next day, Nina guided Mihara to the dormitory. She introduced Mihara to his roommates. They would be living together from now on. Mihara happily got to know Niels and Ito. Unexpectedly, Niels was very fond of Nina. Every time he saw her, Niels could not remain calm. However, Ito knew very well that his roommate had no chance, because Nina was admired by many people. Therefore, Niels would not get that opportunity. Even though Mihara had just met them, he was very friendly with everyone. This made Ito feel comfortable as well. After that, their room gained a new member. The boy's name was Eamon. He had just registered to stay there. However, Eamon was still quite young. It turned out he had just reached the required age. This made Niels somewhat suspicious of his abilities. But after learning about Amon's background, along with his passion, everyone happily got to know each other. As for Abel, there was a member of the Crimson Sword Party named Lin. She believed that Mihara's strength was insufficient. Lin could not believe that someone like him possessed great power. However, Abel had already witnessed it himself, so Lin could not argue any further. Even so, she still held many prejudices against Mihara. The next morning was Mihara's first day of class. The teacher informed everyone that they would enter the dungeon in the afternoon. This made Mihara extremely excited. Before departure, if anyone had questions, the teacher was willing to answer them. At this moment, Mihara raised his hand to ask. He asked whether instant teleportation could be used. to move directly to a dungeon floor. According to the teacher, that was impossible. However, the classmate sitting next to Mihara was very surprised, because he knew about instant teleportation. It was time for everyone to begin exploring the dungeon. The teacher then revealed to the students that the number of monsters in the dungeon increased every year. When the monsters grew out of control, they could even overflow onto the surface. That was why the dungeon in Lontown was heavily reinforced. It even had double walls. The purpose was to prevent monsters from spilling into the town. However, such incidents only happened once every few years. So the teacher reassured the students not to worry too much, because it would not happen anytime soon. Even so, Eamon still felt anxious. Therefore, Mihara stayed by his side to help him relax. After that, everyone arrived at the first floor of the dungeon. This floor had no particularly dangerous monsters. But when Mihara and Eamon moved forward, they suddenly noticed something ahead. The two quickly formed a defensive plan. Soon after, the monster appeared. Mihara immediately created an ice spear to restrain it. Eamon then stepped in. He finished it off with the sword he had prepared beforehand. It was their first day entering the dungeon, yet they successfully dealt with the situation. Unexpectedly, they even obtained loot to bring back. When night fell, Mihara's roommates held a small party. It turned out they wanted to celebrate Mihara and Eamon, because they had completed the course successfully. At that moment, Niels thought it would be even better if there were some drinks to enjoy as well. However, according to Ito, that was not allowed here. Even bringing alcohol inside was strictly forbidden. Ito became curious about Mihara and Amon's plans for tomorrow. Unexpectedly, Eamon wanted to return to the dungeon. However, if he went alone, he still felt a bit afraid. So Eamon hesitated for quite some time. Seeing this, Mihara suggested going together. Eamon immediately agreed. He even felt very happy to have Mihara accompany him. Suddenly, Abel appeared. It turned out he came to check on how Mihara was doing. Mihara's roommates were extremely surprised, because they knew that person was Abel from the Crimson Sword Party. Niels was even a devoted fan of Abel. At that moment, Niels got to shake hands with Abel. Abel also gave everyone some useful advice. Work hard, but do not overdo it, because survival is the most important mission of an adventurer. After a while, the other members of Crimson Sword followed Abel there. At that moment, Lin stared straight at Mihara. This made him feel awkward. Soon after, the Crimson Sword Party quickly left, because they still had urgent matters to handle. As for Lin, she was reminded by Ryu not to look at Mihara like that. However, Lin wanted to see what kind of person Mihara really was, because Abel had revealed that Mihara was an exceptional mage. It turned out Ryu was also curious about this. But as for Abel, he was certain that both of them would be very surprised if they ever had the chance to see Mihara fight. The next day, Mihara and Eamon arrived at the dungeon to face monsters. Even though the two had only just met, they worked together with excellent coordination in battle. After the fight ended, Mihara suddenly revealed something. Amon's fighting style reminded him of Abel. Mihara had once heard that Eamon was trained by a former adventurer in his village, and that turned out to be true. Amon's combat style was influenced by his teacher. This made Mihara extremely excited, because he believed that if Eamon mastered those techniques, he would become very strong in the future. Abel had followed a similar path as well. Eamon was also very surprised. Even though Mihara was a mage, he was extremely knowledgeable about swordsmanship. It turned out Mihara had also been taught by a mentor. The two had trained diligently together. Because of that, Mihara had made some progress. Surprisingly, this fighting style was something Mihara created himself, so he was not very confident in it. However, if he continued to train seriously, improving would no longer be a problem. Because Mihara had once traveled alongside Abel, he trained hard every single day. No matter how talented someone was, hard training was always necessary. The next day, after Mihara finished his course, he went to the library to research a few things. Mihara was surprised by how large the town's library was. There were many books available for reference. However, Mihara did not have much money to invest in them. Unexpectedly, when he stepped outside, the sun had already begun to set. At that moment, Mihara felt something strange. He sensed that the world was about to change. Suddenly, Mihara was attacked by an unfamiliar girl. Fortunately, he He managed to create an ice wall in time to defend himself. Although he did not know who she really was, her goal was clearly to take Mihara's life. Mihara sensed that something was terribly wrong. It would be best for him to leave immediately. However, he did not know if he could escape. As expected, the girl's power was extremely overwhelming. With just a snap of her fingers, Mihara was sent flying a great distance away. However, he still managed to defend successfully. This made the girl unable to hide her surprise. It turned out this was thanks to Dullahan's cloak. After that, the two officially confronted each other. Mihara began launching ice spears. However, the girl's speed was terrifying. She dodged all of Mihara's magic attacks. Even now, Mihara still could not learn her identity. The two charged at each other once again, but both sides had their own strengths. Therefore, it was difficult to determine a winner in this battle. The girl continuously slashed at Mihara, but he refused to stay on the defensive. Mihara unleashed thousands of ice spears to counterattack. In the end, he finally managed to throw the girl off balance. Mihara seized this opportunity to defeat his opponent, because he wanted to end everything right there. However, Mihara soon found himself at a disadvantage. The sun was gradually disappearing. As a result, the girl also had little time left to continue the fight. At that moment, she introduced herself. Leonoj was the girl's name. With limited time, she had to leave immediately. However, Leonoj did not forget to promise to meet Mihara again. Because with Mihara's strength, sooner or later, the two of them would meet again. If it was not Leonoj who faced him next time, then someone from her group would step in instead. Everything soon returned to normal. Leonoj vanished in an instant. After that, Mihara returned to the dormitory. But he did not see anyone there. It turned out they were being bullied by Dan's group. Dan was a student from a different class. However, when Mihara appeared, he quickly resolved the situation. Dan became furious once again, because he felt that Mihara was looking down on him. Naturally, Dan's strength was no match for Mihara. Even though Mihara only used a small portion of his power, it was still enough to terrify Dan. The next day, Eto's group headed down into the dungeon. Unfortunately, Eamon was injured, but thanks to Eto's healing magic, Eamon was able to remain safe for now. Even so, Niels was extremely worried, because they had just gone through a dangerous battle, one that nearly cost them their lives. Therefore, Niels suggested that everyone return together. As a result, today's mission came to an end, because everyone's lives came first. As for Mihara, he was still shaken by Leonoj's magic from the previous day. It was so terrifying that he could not stop thinking about it. Therefore, Mihara realized he needed to develop his strengths. Only then could he properly face Leonoj. Mihara even felt a sense of jealousy toward her, because Leonoj possessed extremely overwhelming techniques. Combined with her lightning-fast speed, her power only became even more terrifying. As for Eto's group, they returned to the Adventurers Guild. Ito handed Nina a strange magic stone. Even Nina was shocked, because this type of magic stone had never appeared on the 5th floor of the dungeon. Therefore, Nina immediately reported it to the guild master. The situation seemed more dangerous than expected. To prevent any unexpected disasters, the guild master summoned the Crimson Sword Party and the White Brigade. He then informed them about the current situation. At this moment, the White Brigade became curious about what actions they would take next. So the guild master presented a clear plan. Everyone would descend into the dungeon to investigate, to confirm whether a great surge had occurred. That is, a sudden and uncontrollable increase in the number of monsters. The guild master revealed that it had been nearly 10 years since the last occurrence. So it was possible that it would return in the near future. Rhea also agreed with this opinion. The guild master suddenly granted an advance reward to both parties. Once the mission was completed, everyone would receive additional gold coins. However, Abel understood the core of the mission. That was the possibility of a great surge occurring this time. And indeed, that was the case, because the guild master wanted to know the probability of it happening. If it truly occurred, everyone would need to immediately return to the surface and quickly seal off the dungeon entrance to defend it. According to the guild master, the operation would begin tomorrow morning. Thus, both parties prepared to accept the mission. As for Mihara, he continued heading to the library. This time, Mihara went to a library in the northern district. because he knew that place had abundant resources. So he wanted to research alchemy in more detail. The atmosphere in this library was very unique. This alone sparked Mihara's interest. After that, he searched for the materials he needed. Unexpectedly, Mihara encountered the same girl from before. At that moment, Sarah also recognized him. Meanwhile, the White Brigade and the Crimson Sword had begun their operation. Only adventurers ranked C or higher were allowed to participate, because this was an extremely high difficulty mission. Just as the guild master was about to open the dungeon gate, Abel suddenly stopped him, because he felt an ominous premonition. Therefore, Abel asked Lynn to use magic to scan the surroundings. As expected, she detected numerous signals, and they were heavily concentrated around the entrance. The number she sensed was several hundred monsters. Because of this, the guild master urgently called for reinforcements. Since the Great Surge was about to strike, adventurers were then summoned to the dungeon entrance to defend it. As for Mihara, he was approached and greeted by Sarah. Sarah did not expect to meet Mihara again so soon. She became curious about why Mihara came all the way to such a distant library. Mihara did not hide anything from Sarah. He explained that he came to study alchemy because he wanted to create an earth golem. Sarah was impressed by Mihara's ambitious goal. After that, she guided him to suitable reference materials, because Sarah was familiar with nearly every corner of the library. Unexpectedly, the two gained a chance to learn more about each other. Back at the Adventurers Guild, everyone had gathered at the defensive wall. The guild master saw monsters beginning to emerge. Adventurers immediately launched their attacks, because they wanted to suppress the monsters as quickly as possible. Unexpectedly, the monsters kept appearing in greater numbers. Some of them even wielded weapons, causing adventurers to face serious difficulties. The guild master was shocked, because the monsters were clearly out of control. Their numbers were far greater than in previous incidents. This made the situation extremely difficult to contain. The available weapons were also running low, even though everything had been gathered from weapon shops in town. Niels suddenly delivered a message from the guild master to Abel. A massive monster was about to enter the battlefield, and the Crimson Sword Party would have to face it. Therefore, Abel and his teammates needed to prepare immediately. It was time for the adventurers to counterattack. Everyone used magic one after another to deal with the monsters. In the end, they were forced to face 3 gigantic monsters. At this moment, the Crimson Sword and the White Brigade divided their tasks. Each group would handle one monster. Everyone moved into action at once. Suddenly, another monster appeared. It turned out this one was the Monster King. The 3 earlier giants were merely its subordinates. With such overwhelming power, the adventurers were now facing an extremely difficult challenge. However, thanks to everyone's perfect coordination, Abel seized the moment when the monster let its guard down. He swiftly drove his sword straight into the monster's chest. After that, Lynn used her rain of bullets as the finishing blow. In the end, the monster finally collapsed. Everyone then celebrated this victory together. When night fell, a feast was held to celebrate the win. However, when Mihara returned, he had no idea what was going on. Meanwhile, the guild master could not join the celebration, because he still had to deal with paperwork. After every battle, the guild master had to apply for funds to cover all expenses. Even worse, the aftermath of this attack was extremely complicated. As for Mihara, his roommates explained everything that had happened earlier. At this moment, Niels was still in awe of Abel's skills, because Abel had fought incredibly well back then. With Lynn's perfect coordination, the two of them successfully defeated the monster. However, Abel believed that everyone had done their best. After that, Lynn and Rhea approached the group. Unexpectedly, Lynn had several questions for Mihara. She was shocked to learn that Mihara could create an ice wall in midair. Not only that, its range even exceeded 40 meters. This made Lynn completely unable to believe it. She suspected that Mihara's magic might be a primal type, because most of his spells were cast verbally. To Lynn, Mihara was extremely strange. The next morning, Nils's group felt very bored, because they had nothing to do, since the dungeon had been sealed off. Unexpectedly, Mihara decided to hire his roommates, so they could take on missions together. Nearby, there was an abandoned village. Mihara promised generous pay if they completed the task. The mission was to collect magic copper ore, which Mihara planned to use for magical alchemy. Everyone agreed without hesitation. After that, Mihara noticed a group of aggressive men. They were harassing a young girl. Unexpectedly, the captain of the White Brigade happened to be there. He successfully dealt with those scoundrels. Mihara observed everything from above. The two then greeted each other. Surprisingly, the White Brigade captain already knew Mihara. It turned out Abel had introduced him before. However, the captain had urgent business, so he had to leave in a hurry. When night fell, Abel and Mihara had dinner together. Abel wondered how Mihara knew that after dinner, he would definitely visit the entertainment district. Abel was startled. He immediately covered Mihara's mouth, because he did not want others to hear that. After that, Abel tried to change the subject, but Mihara quickly noticed. Unexpectedly, Mihara used it to tease Abel instead. Suddenly, Abel asked Mihara for help with something. It turned out he had a special mission. Some royal knights were causing trouble. Abel did not want the situation to escalate. He had learned that they planned to sneak out tonight, so Abel decided to suppress them before any problems occurred. Mihara immediately understood Abel's plan. When the two entered a dead-end alley, someone suddenly attacked Mihara from behind. Thanks to Mihara's sharp instincts, he successfully dodged the ambush. He even dealt with them swiftly and cleanly. Perhaps because Mihara's strength far exceeded their expectations. Unexpectedly, an alchemy tool dropped from one of them. Mihara was delighted, thinking he would finally obtain it. However, Abel stopped him, because Abel needed to use those items as evidence. The next morning, Mihara unexpectedly met a young girl. After learning that Mihara was an adventurer, she immediately asked him to escort her to the Adventurers Guild to report something. It turned out that the person who received the letter was Abel. After he finished reading it, he learned that the Crimson Sword needed to assist the royal mages in investigating the dungeon. However, this matter made Abel feel worried. He feared that an accident might happen like it did 10 years ago. Back then, a group of A-rank adventurers went missing. That happened after they entered the dungeon to explore. Meanwhile, the Great Flood Tide had only recently ended. Normally, the Adventurers Guild would issue a ban. No one would be allowed to enter the dungeon for 1 month. At this moment, Mihara had already left. The girl then introduced herself. Her name was Natalie. Natalie belonged to a famous water element mage family. Lin learned that Natalie used the same magic element as Mihara, so she did not hesitate to ask Natalie. She asked whether Natalie knew anyone who could create an ice wall in midair. Of course, Natalie had never heard of such a thing. She even thought it could not possibly exist in this world. Abel, on the other hand, felt completely helpless. He knew that Lin had not given up on the matter involving Mihara. Therefore, Abel had no choice but to issue an order. He forbade the members of the Crimson Sword from interfering with Mihara. The simple reason was that they were no match for him. Abel knew this fact very clearly. Even if the entire Crimson Sword team fought together, they still could not defeat Mihara alone. Abel himself dared to assert this. As a result, the other members no longer had any doubts. In addition, Abel gave Natalie some advice. If she ever encountered any trouble, she should boldly seek help from Mihara. After that, everyone arrived at the dungeon. Someone handed Abel a residual mana detection device. It could detect all abnormal traces. It could even automatically report information to the analysis team. At this moment, Abel could only marvel at alchemy. On the following day, Mihara's roommates returned. They had successfully brought back magic ore. Therefore, everyone received their proper payment. As for the people inside the dungeon, although they had inspected it for several days, nothing unusual was found. However, they discovered a mysterious black gate. When one person reached out to touch it, they were transported to another space. This time, it seemed that everyone had just undergone spatial transfer. At that moment, the oldest person realized something. He had just been transported through that black gate. If the assumption was correct, this was the 38th floor. This was very likely the cause of the Great Flood Tide. At this moment, a dark shadow suddenly approached. The support team on the surface did not know what to do. All responses had vanished because many people had disappeared without a trace. After the inspection results came in, it was confirmed that everyone was on the 40th floor of the dungeon. Soon after, a person from the Magic Academy arrived. His name was Blatt. He was also acting under the king's orders. Blatt was curious about whether something abnormal had happened in the dungeon. As expected, something abnormal did occur. In just a short moment, everyone inside the dungeon suddenly vanished. For now, Blatt would send someone to inform the Adventurers Guild. After that, he would have to explain everything clearly to them. Meanwhile, the guild master had also just received the news. The inspection team had gone missing in the dungeon. This shocked him greatly. What the guild master needed to do now was to rush to the dungeon entrance immediately. Before leaving, he instructed Nina. She was not to reveal this information to the outside world. This was until the guild master confirmed the situation himself. Meanwhile, Mihara returned to the library to research alchemy. Unexpectedly, he ran into Sarah once again. Seeing this, Mihara hurried over to ask for her help. This time, Mihara wanted to find materials related to solar eclipses and great flood tides. He wanted to compare them with each other. Of course, Sarah knew the locations of those books, so Mihara did not need to spend much time searching. After that, the two of them thoroughly discussed this matter. Sarah even firmly believed that something was clearly connected. Solar eclipses and great flood tides are connected. More specifically, throughout history, a solar eclipse has always occurred before each great flood tide. However, according to Sarah's observations, a total solar eclipse like the current one had never appeared before. It turned out that Sarah had previously researched this issue, but she was extremely curious about how Mihara had discovered this connection. On the surface, he only pretended it was a sudden thought, because Mihara could not tell Sarah that he had fought an Akuma during a solar eclipse. As for Abel's group, they were still lost in an unidentified space. After that, Lin cast magic to search for life in that area. Unexpectedly, she discovered about 1,000 people far ahead, so everyone decided to head there to look for more clues. Unexpectedly, when they arrived, demons appeared. These were monsters belonging to the Supreme Being. Even adventurers had never encountered them before. They recognized them because of features similar to those in ancient records. These demons were extremely powerful, because they possessed immunity to magic. Therefore, no one could be a match for them. At this moment, the Crimson Sword team charged to the front. They used a close combat strategy to attack. However, the Crimson Sword could not hold out for long, because there were still 6 demons remaining. Both Lin and Rhea had already run out of mana, so Abel had no choice but to fight alone. He was determined to claim victory. Rhea, watching from the outside, was extremely worried. However, these demons were frighteningly fast and strong. Even Abel had to be cautious. As expected, his strength could not last long. When Abel gradually began to lose focus, a demon prepared to deliver the finishing blow. At that moment, Mihara suddenly appeared in Abel's mind. At first, Abel thought it was just a dream, but it turned out that Mihara had truly appeared to save everyone. Not long before, Natalie had rushed to Mihara to ask for help. She told him everything about the current tense situation. Natalie revealed that Abel and the others had gone missing inside the dungeon. Therefore, Mihara quickly created an ice vehicle. He and Natalie hurried there together. At this moment, Mihara fully understood the situation, so he decided to enter the dungeon to rescue everyone. Although Mihara had been forbidden by the guards, he used magic to enter anyway. Thus, Mihara arrived at the exact critical moment. After that, he used his equipped sword. At that moment, Mihara successfully severed the demon's head. However, the demon was still able to survive afterward. Unexpectedly, Mihara then decided to use magic to shatter the demon into hundreds of pieces. In just a short moment, Mihara completely destroyed it. Therefore, Abel was extremely grateful to Mihara for saving his life and the lives of the others. After that, everyone studied the demon's magic stone together. However, there were no special clues, so everyone then set off to leave the dungeon. Abel did not forget to thank Mihara once again. Mihara, on the other hand, only wanted free meals for a week. At this moment, he had something he wanted to ask Abel, so Abel became serious in order to answer him. Unexpectedly, Mihara was only asking about curry. He had previously heard that there was a place in Lontown that sold amazing curry. Therefore, Mihara seriously wanted to try it. As for Abel, of course, this was not difficult at all for him. Abel could even treat Mihara to as much food as he wanted. After that, everyone successfully left the dungeon. The guild master was delighted that everyone had returned safely. He had thought earlier that it would be difficult to ever see them again. However, the guild master was not pleased with Mihara's actions earlier, because Mihara had ignored the guards and gone deep into the dungeon. But the guild master did not yet know that Mihara was the one who had defeated the demon, and that he had successfully brought everyone back safely. But thanks to the revelation from the old man, the guild master was finally able to learn the truth. Although Abel possessed outstanding abilities, he still struggled greatly against the demons. Abel had even nearly died at the hands of those evil creatures. At that critical moment, Mihara suddenly appeared. He killed those demons in the blink of an eye. This made everyone present unable to believe what they saw. Indeed, Mihara's strength was astonishing. On the following morning, Mihara went to a certain place with his roommates. It turned out to be the restaurant that Abel had recommended earlier. When Mihara stepped inside, he was shocked to see that Sarah was also there. And of course, she felt the same way. Sarah did not expect Mihara to know about this place. After all, the restaurant was famous for its amazing curry. After that, the two of them sat together. At this moment, Sarah became curious about Mihara's current residence. So Mihara revealed that he was staying at the Adventurers Guild dormitory. At a glance, Sarah could tell that Mihara was no ordinary person, because it was extremely rare for a newcomer like him to already be ranked D. Mihara also learned that Sarah was an adventurer. However, he rarely saw her at the guild. It turned out that she had only moved here not long ago. But because Sarah had many matters to handle outside, she rarely needed to visit the Adventurers Guild. Unexpectedly, Sarah was actually a swordsmanship instructor. She was currently teaching the Night Squad in Lontown. Mihara was surprised by how strong Sarah was compared to her appearance. At this moment, Sarah suddenly made a proposal to Mihara. She wanted the two of them to spar together. Mihara became momentarily stunned but immediately agreed. Suddenly, Sarah charged straight at him. Despite Sarah's exceptional speed, Mihara was still able to dodge her attack. This left Sarah deeply impressed, because no knight had ever been able to evade it. This time, Sarah decided to get serious. She immediately rushed toward Mihara at lightning speed. At this speed, Mihara could not possibly hold out for long. As a result, the sword in his hand shattered. Mihara could only admit defeat. But Sarah unexpectedly ran over and hugged him. Because Mihara had managed to block her previous strike. This was because Sarah had combined her swordsmanship with her own magic. Indeed, Mihara's strength made her marvel. Sarah became curious about how he had trained. But Mihara said he had only trained with his master. That was also the person who had given him the cloak he was currently wearing. A short while later, Ryoubo-kun appeared. She was Sarah's attendant. Ryoubo-kun came to inform Sarah that it was time for her lesson. So Sarah had to hurry over there. Sarah specifically instructed Ryoubo-kun to escort Mihara home safely, because he was someone very important to Sarah. Unexpectedly, the guild master was also present. He happened to want to speak with Mihara as well. So the guild master would be the one to escort him back to the dormitory. It turned out that what he wanted to talk about was yesterday's incident. At this moment, the guild master was very grateful to Mihara for everything he had done the day before. However, the guild master also had a punishment for Mihara, because Mihara had ignored the guard's warnings and entered a dangerous area. At this moment, Mihara officially received his first mission. After becoming a member of the Adventurers Guild, Mihara was more than willing to accept this mission. He was tasked with escorting several merchants to their destination and returning safely. His destination would be Whitnash. Just as Mihara returned to the dormitory, he suddenly received a request from Niels. A monster subjugation request had been issued in Niels's hometown. Niels truly wanted to take on this mission. However, it was only assigned to adventurers of rank D or higher. So Niels was not qualified to accept it, because he was only rank E. Therefore, Niels asked Mihara to form a temporary party this time, so that he and the others could complete the mission together. Unexpectedly, Mihara immediately agreed to this plan. After that, everyone went to discuss it with the guild master. However, he believed that this matter would not be easy at all, because this request had originally come from another town, but the adventurers there had completely failed. That was why Lontown received this request instead. Although the mission itself was not particularly difficult, the local residents refused to cooperate. As a result, the adventurers failed immediately. At this moment, the guild master only warned everyone to be careful, because a previous E-rank party had members who were seriously injured. After encountering more than 30 skeleton soldiers, Mihara promised that he would do his best together with everyone. After that, they set off on their journey. The trip was not as far as everyone had imagined. At this moment, the villagers recognized Niels. He was also very happy to see the people here again. Mihara then began teasing Niels. It seemed that he was not shunned by the villagers of this town. Mihara joked that judging by Niels's appearance, he must have been quite a mischievous kid when he was young. After that, everyone went to the village chief to learn about the situation. Although Niels had only left the town 1 year ago, his more mature demeanor still surprised everyone else. At this moment, Niels introduced his companions, Bolin and the man standing before everyone, who was also the village chief of this town. After a while, everyone sat down together to exchange information. Niels did not hesitate to raise a question, because he already knew from before that the previous adventurer group claimed the villagers refused to cooperate. So Niels was extremely curious about this matter. It turned out that things were not as everyone had thought. After the first adventurer group arrived to carry out the mission, unfortunately, they met a tragic end. The first group ventured deep into the forest to attack the monsters, but they shed blood and died on the spot. By the time the second adventurer group arrived, the villagers realized that things would become dangerous. Therefore, they drove that adventurer group away. To the villagers, it had been a life or death battle. When night fell, Mihara's group was staying at Niels's house. At this moment, his younger brother had the chance to talk with everyone. Niels's younger brother was especially happy, because one day Niels was able to bring home people he trusted. After that, Niels also appeared. He informed everyone that the villagers had agreed to this hunting mission. Niels also had another matter to share, but he wanted everyone to keep it absolutely secret. A guardian beast lived in the eastern forest, and that was also where everyone would be heading together tomorrow. However, only the village chief was allowed to meet it. Niels himself had never seen it before. The second secret concerned an ancient temple. However, Niels did not explain this matter clearly. The next morning, the adventurers began their journey. Suddenly, everyone discovered the footprints of monsters. This area had also been a place where many of them had appeared before. This was something the village chief had personally witnessed. At this moment, Mihara sensed that the monsters were approaching. In about 5 minutes, they would arrive here, so everyone quickly devised a plan. They would kill all the monsters and leave only one alive. That one would lead Mihara's group back to their lair. Everyone achieved initial success with this plan. After dealing with the ordinary monsters, the giant monster, the only one left alive, finally appeared. At this moment, Niels and Eamon became flustered, because they were no match for that monster. Fortunately, Mihara quickly created ice chains to save his teammates. After that, Niels was the one who delivered the final blow to the giant monster. Thus, everyone completed the mission and returned victoriously. At this moment, Nasu was the one who welcomed them back. She was the elder of this town. When Nasu heard that they had just defeated the monsters, she was extremely surprised, because at last, a group of adventurers had succeeded. After that, Nasu led everyone to the guardian beast's location. Mihara seemed to be imagining something rather ominous. Even Niels noticed it, but when they arrived, things were not as Mihara had imagined, because when the guardian beast revealed itself, it was nothing like what Mihara expected. The guardian beast was named Kusan, and it strongly wished to get acquainted with Mihara. However, this greatly surprised both the village chief and Nasu, because Kusan had never once spoken its own name before. It turned out that Kusan knew Mihara's background. Mihara himself belonged to the fairy race, so when Mihara came to this place, Kusan felt deeply honored. Kusan could even live for another 1,000 years, because the power surrounding Mihara could spread such an effect. After that, Kusan began talking about everyone's prey. There were about 30 monsters wandering around the temple, and inside, there was another monster with terrifying power. Therefore, the first thing they needed to do was deal with the 30 outside. Once that was completed, the final one would open the temple gate, allowing the adventurer party to deal with it. Unexpectedly, Ito easily used magic to fight those monsters. He achieved initial success with this plan. Next, everything depended on Mihara's strength. But for him, this was not difficult at all. So he immediately created an ice path to make the monster slip and fall. At this moment, Mihara's teammates worked together to finish it off. However, the monster was still extremely tough. Therefore, Niels and Eamon could not quickly deal with it. But the creature was standing on a special ice path, so it could not easily escape from Mihara. In the end, the monster was completely destroyed. After a while, everyone entered the temple together. Then Nasu revealed the story related to the gem. This temple originally possessed a brilliantly shining gem. But one day, it suddenly exploded and disappeared. The guardian beast told Nasu that the cave had received a source of power from elsewhere at that time. That power might have been the cause of the monster's creation. Therefore, everyone decided to use magic to seal it. They would block the entrance to the cave. That way, those monsters would never appear again. Many days later, Niels and Ito were planning new living arrangements. Because the two of them could no longer rent the dormitory, since they had entered their third year after joining the Adventurers Guild. At this moment, Niels and Ito asked Eamon for his opinion, whether he wanted to live together with them. Of course, Eamon immediately agreed. Mihara, on the other hand, needed more time to think, because he still had many matters to deal with. As for the guild master, he wanted Abel to attend the Whitnash festival as a representative. Normally, the captain of the White Brigade would handle this, but he was currently busy with other matters. So the guild master had no choice but to ask Abel. Returning to Mihara's group of friends, Niels named their party room number 10. However, Mihara was curious why that name was chosen. But to Niels, there was nothing special about it. He simply wanted to name it that way. Since everyone was continuing with a new mission, they would do their best to complete it. However, this journey seemed quite long, which greatly surprised Mihara, but he quickly became excited when Niels announced that there would be a large festival there. Therefore, Mihara felt very happy and eager. When night fell, the group walked around the town together. Everyone ate to their heart's content, making Mihara and his friends extremely satisfied. As for the army, they were stationed outside the town. They were carrying out procedures to enter inside. When night came, the grand banquet hosted by the royal family began. Many distinguished guests were present here, and the third prince of the empire stepped forward to welcome them. His name was Conrad. The red-haired girl was named Fiona. She was the younger sister of the third prince. However, Fiona looked somewhat tired. Conrad was certain that she was still not used to this kind of situation. Unexpectedly, Fiona was well versed in swordsmanship. Even her magic was no weaker than anyone else's. On the following day, when the festival officially began, the exact name of this festival was Whitnash. Mihara's group discovered that Abel was also present. He was even honored with a seat among the distinguished guests. At this moment, Niels noticed the red-haired girl, Fiona. Fiona's striking appearance made it impossible for Niels to take his eyes off her. After that, the Crimson Sword team also appeared. At this moment, Lin noticed that in the audience seats, there was a dense barrier covering the surroundings. It might be because the Whitnash family possessed a hereditary treasure. It released magic to form walls of wind. But according to what Ryu knew, the Whitnash family rarely used it because it consumed a great amount of energy. However, today was the day the family appeared in public. Even a single act of terrorism could lead to war, so spending a bit more energy was not an issue. As for Mihara, he only hoped that everything would go smoothly. After that, the Crimson Sword wanted to stroll around the festival for a bit, while Mihara and his teammates would begin their mission. However, while Mihara was walking, he accidentally bumped into Luska. Luska was the deputy commander of the Royal Magic Division. After that, he and his companion walked around the festival. They were trying to buy as much food as possible to bring back for Fiona, because they were afraid she would grow bored at the spectator stands. As for Abel, he happened to run into Conrad. Unexpectedly, the third prince knew the reason Abel was here. That Abel was attending on behalf of the Loon Adventurers Guild to participate in this important festival. At this moment, Abel mentioned Fiona, but Conrad was curious why Abel was paying attention to his younger sister. However, Abel did not know how to answer. After that, Conrad had other matters to attend to and left. Abel then suddenly felt a bit short of breath, because he was not good at social conversations like that. After that, Luska returned to Fiona's side. He immediately took out the food he had bought earlier. This made Fiona cheerful again, because she had been extremely bored with having to attend the festival. As for Mihara, he, his teammates, and Abel were enjoying the festival together. At this moment, Abel wanted to try archery to win a prize. Since Mihara kept urging him to do it, Abel had no choice but to agree. Unexpectedly, he succeeded with ease, leaving the onlookers utterly amazed. At the Adventurers Guild, Sarah was present. It turned out she had come to look for Mihara, because Sarah had found a clue from the research he did in the library. But Nina told Sarah that Mihara was not here at the moment, because he was currently on assignment outside the city. Mihara had accepted a long-term mission, so he would not be returning to the Loon Adventurers Guild for now. After hearing this, Sarah was slightly shocked. She was probably feeling disappointed at not being able to meet Mihara. Returning to Mihara, while he and his teammates were watching the townsfolk enjoy themselves, the guild master appeared at that moment. While he was on his way here, someone had already begun planning something sinister. They intended to act tonight. When night fell, Abel once again met Conrad. After that, the next person to appear was Fiona. At this moment, Conrad formally introduced his younger sister to Abel. Then the two of them left together. Abel felt uneasy because he was not carrying his sword. However, he felt reassured, because there were magical defenses protecting everyone here. Unfortunately, the guards discovered that their treasured artifact could no longer transmit magical power. As a result, the barrier covering the area was instantly shattered. This time, it seemed that trouble was about to descend upon the banquet. Returning to many years ago, this red-haired boy was Luska. Luska lived peacefully with his parents in a remote rural area. Because he had talent and swordsmanship, Luska's master gifted him a sword. Although Luska was only 6 years old, his master believed that Luska would be able to get used to it very quickly. So Luska was very happy to have his own sword. When the villagers went hunting, Luska performed very well in his role, even though he was still very young. When night fell, everyone returned home to hold a feast, because the morning hunt had gone smoothly. While everyone was eating, Luska's father overheard information that bandits were hiding nearby. He suspected that those criminals were scouting the village. As everyone had predicted, just a few days later, the bandits appeared. Outside, the men fought with all their strength. Luska and his mother hid inside the house to avoid danger. However, the villains showed them no mercy. At that moment, one of the ringleaders took Luska's mother's life. Luska was too young to do anything. A short while later, his father appeared. Unfortunately, he was also killed by the criminals. In that instant, Luska lost both of his family members. He was left with no one by his side. Luska did not know how to react, because the situation before him was too horrifying. Luska could not accept such an ending. Fortunately, his master was there to protect him. At that moment, a pack of wolves came rushing over. The two of them had to escape immediately. However, the situation was extremely tense. So his master ordered Luska to run toward the river. Because wolves hated water, Luska's master stayed behind to deal with the remaining wolves. Unexpectedly, Luska accidentally fell into a waterfall, just before he could be torn apart by the wolves. Thanks to that, Luska survived until the next day. When he woke up, he saw no one, except for unfamiliar faces. Suddenly, Luska burst into uncontrollable tears, because he could not bear the shock. The one who saved Luska was an elder from another town. He decided to take Luska in. From then on, Luska had a new place to rely on. At that moment, Luska resolved to become strong, so that he could confront those evil people. Returning to the present, Luska had a bad feeling. Even though a barrier surrounded the area, he still felt that something was strange. As expected, his intuition was correct. Because the barrier around the banquet venue was broken, the place was engulfed in violent flames. Conrad and Fiona were in danger. However, thanks to her magical power, Fiona temporarily created a barrier to protect herself and Conrad. After that, the two of them moved to a safer place to hide. Fiona then used magic to send out a distress signal. Fortunately, the night squad detected it quickly. Mihara's group also noticed the signal. Luska's team rushed to the distress location. Fiona and Conrad were working together to face the enemy. However, Fiona's strength was limited. She could not maintain her magic for long. At that moment, Fiona was careless and got attacked, causing her to fall from above to the ground below. Luska witnessed this scene with his own eyes. This caused him to recall his painful memories, because everyone he loved had died right before his eyes. This tragedy was repeating itself once again with Fiona. However, Fiona was slowly falling toward the position of Niels and his teammates. So they noticed something falling from above. Niels quickly realized that it was Princess Fiona, so they quickly ran over to catch her. Fortunately, Niels successfully caught Fiona from above. However, she was already unconscious. Unexpectedly, those villains chased all the way here. At this moment, Eamon stepped in to punish them. In a short while, he brought the fight to an end. After that, they planned to take Fiona to a safe place. But Luska suddenly appeared from above. This immediately put Nils's group on guard, because they still did not know Luska's identity. A major misunderstanding arose between them. It turned out that Luska believed Niels and his companions were the masterminds behind this conflict. So he began attacking them in order to take Fiona away. Fortunately, Ito quickly created a shield. That was how everyone managed to stay safe. However, Eto's power was no match for Luska. Unexpectedly, Mihara appeared at the critical moment to turn the situation around. But Luska's misunderstanding did not fade. At this moment, Mihara became his target. Luska then launched a fierce attack on Mihara. But with Mihara's strength, he was naturally able to restrain Luska completely. This was something Luska never expected. Even though Luska used all his strongest attacks, he could not shake Mihara at all. It was then Mihara's turn to strike back. He began creating thousands of ice spears around Luska. Although Luska could destroy them, thousands more ice spears continued to appear as Mihara kept creating them, leaving Luska overwhelmed by the sight. At this moment, Abel finally arrived. He ordered both of them to stop. However, Mihara had no intention of listening. Abel had no choice but to explain everything. He knew that Luska was worried about Fiona's condition. But everyone present here were adventurers from Lontown. Most importantly, they were not directly involved in this battle. So Abel asked everyone to hear him out. However, Mihara refused to cooperate. He even intended to kill Luska, because of what Luska had just done to Mihara's teammates. In the end, Luska could no longer endure it. He began to unleash his full power. Unexpectedly, Luska created a devastating force of destruction, making the situation even worse. Everyone around was truly anxious. However, Mihara quickly extinguished it with thousands of water streams. Abel desperately tried to stop the clash between the two. At this moment, he told Luska about the mission. The reason Abel was here was because Conrad had sent him to protect Fiona. And this fight was meaningless to Abel, because above all else, Fiona's life was what mattered most. As for Mihara, although Abel understood his anger, he still begged Mihara to lower his sword. However, Mihara refused to listen. He immediately launched an ice spear toward Abel. Unexpectedly, Abel did not dodge it, because he did not want things to go too far. More importantly, Abel did not want Mihara to commit irreversible actions, because if that happened, Mihara might never be able to turn back. Upon hearing this, Mihara finally calmed down. After that, he asked Abel to take Fiona back to Conrad. And thus, the battle finally came to an end. Many days later, Fiona regained consciousness. She expressed her gratitude to everyone. Luska also realized his mistakes. He sincerely apologized to them as well, for the misunderstandings he had caused. After that, Mihara and his teammates returned to Lontown. Meanwhile, Sarah felt extremely uneasy, because her mind was now filled entirely with Mihara's image, even though the two of them had not met for very long. Mihara had left a deep impression on Sarah. At this moment, Sarah went to the familiar curry shop. Unexpectedly, Mihara was also there, enjoying his favorite dish, so Sarah happily ran over to him. After that, Sarah took Mihara to the library, because she had found many materials related to alchemy. This made Mihara extremely excited. He was truly very grateful to Sarah, because thanks to her, Mihara had more opportunities to learn new things. After that, the two of them went to Abel's place. However, Abel was busy with many matters, so Sarah and Mihara could only spend time together for now. Suddenly, Sarah had something she wanted to say. She was curious why Mihara always seemed tense whenever they talked. Yet when Mihara talked with Abel, He was very relaxed. This made Sarah feel a little disappointed, because to her, this felt quite unfair. Sarah also wanted Mihara to treat her in a friendly way, so Mihara reluctantly agreed. As for fake Michael, he was observing Mihara's journey, as well as the events awaiting him in the future. However, the path Mihara would walk was certainly not an easy one. Regarding Mihara's previous encounter with Luska, that had only been the beginning. Of course, in the future, their conflict might continue. A peaceful and safe life would likely be very distant for Mihara. But fake Michael also hoped that Mihara would be able to survive through it all. That's all for today's video. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to support Oni-chan in future videos. Thank you all for watching. Much love.